So before we talk about how photosynthesis takes place and all the chemical reactions that happen there, let's talk about where it takes place and kind of give an overview of why it takes place. So photosynthesis takes place in the organelle called the chloroplast, and our chloroplasts are only found in plant cells, and that's what gives it its green color. And our membranes that are photosynthetic, that are actually going to work with light and conduct the photosynthesis, are called thylakoids. And our thylakoids are interconnected with each other, and so you have here one little disc of a thylakoid, and these discs are arranged in stacks, and we call those stacks grana. One stack would be a granum, and several of these stacks, all the stacks within the chloroplast, are called granum. And the pigments are actually on the thylakoid membrane. So on one particular disc, you're going to see, right, if this is my thylakoid, just one disc, this membrane, this outer ridge itself, just like the cell membrane, the thylakoid has its own membrane as well. And within the outside of the chloroplast, you have the stroma, and it's very similar. You can think of it as analogous to our cytoplasm. And so basically photosynthesis is occurring on the in the thylakoid, on the thylakoid membrane, and outside in the stroma. So we could see here, you can label your diagram that you have. You've got, to break it down, use a green pen. You've got right here one disc called the thylakoid, and you've got on the disc itself is a membrane, and then if I have two discs stacked together, the space in here is simply called the thylakoid space. So you've got a thylakoid membrane, and in between two discs are the thylakoid space. You've got an entire stack of thylakoids, and that is called our granum. And then this outermost space within the chloroplast, outside of the thylakoids, is the stroma. So how do we basically take energy from the sun? We all know, hopefully, that sunlight is involved in photosynthesis, and we're taking that energy and we're using it in order to generate something. And ultimately at the end of photosynthesis, we're trying to generate glucose, and glucose can then be, it's a form of energy, glucose can then be used by another organelle of the cell to produce some energy. So when our chlorophyll, our pigment, absorbs light in the thylakoid, a large fraction of that energy is going to be transferred into electrons. So basically, electrons are energy. It's a high form of energy, and it helps to make photosynthesis work. They're highly reactive, and so we can't just take an electron, or the cells, the chloroplast can't just take an electron and use that, within the cell as energy. It has to be put back into something that is not reactive, that's stable. And so an electron carrier is basically what's going to come along and help a compound. It's just a chemical, and it can basically take those electrons and store it within its chemical composition, and it will accept a pair of high energy electrons to basically put it inside of a bond, and then transfer that energy to another molecule. And that's really what happens in photosynthesis. So we're taking sunlight energy, turning it into a form of chemical energy, which at the end is basically glucose. So if you think of an electron as a hot potato, right? You don't want to touch the hot potato with your hand. You want to have a carrier of that hot potato. And so that's going to be your oven mitt. So you'll put on an oven mitt, right, to grab that potato out so that you can put some sour cream and bacon and all that good stuff on top of your potato. And so if you think of your glove as the electron carrier, your hot potato is the energy, the high energy electrons. You basically want to move that potato from one place to another so you can transport it, and you're going to use this glove. So in our case of a plant, we have what is called NADP+, Okay, and that plus is signifying that we are needing some electrons. And this is the really long name, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. Okay, that's a really long name, so we just call it NADP plus. And it is a carrier molecule. And so what's happening is you see NADP plus accepting and holding on to these 2 electrons. You're going to pick up this potato, and along with it we have to have a hydrogen ion come along. So this hydrogen ion, basically when you pair these 2 together, the only way you could pair NADP plus with the hydrogen is if you have 2 paired electrons in the middle. And so when that occurs, that's a chemical reaction. We are storing the 2 electrons between the bonds of the phosphate and the hydrogen. And so it's safely stored, it's stable, those electrons are not unstable anymore, and then later on we can break this down to extract this energy, and this energy can then be used in other ways. And just to give you a bit of an overview of where those electrons are going, here we see, right, the NADPH, that's the stored, we have stored electrons in the hydrogen and phosphate bond, basically going outside into the stroma. So we have only been in the thylakoid at this moment when we've taken this light energy and turned it into chemical energy. And we'll look at later on how we can basically utilize that NADP plus, H and use it within the stroma to extract even more energy.